Military conflicts around the world, floods, fires, hunger, and poverty. It's a good thing that humanity came up with nothing less than a world government to solve global problems. After all, the United Nations has a huge budget, the ability to intervene in the affairs of almost any country, and, of course, the trust of all nations. Let's see what they're up to right now. It looks like they're putting up a huge inflatable toilet in front of the UN headquarters in New York. It's no secret that, in its current state, the UN is just a gathering of politicians who can deliver a few pompous speeches to make the news headlines. Add to that their constant concern, and you get $5.5 billion in funding. Nevertheless, the Office for Saving Humanity is both a sad and rather amusing story. The UN officials remind me of the alien race from Douglas Adams's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Let me remind you, the Vogons are the fiercest bureaucrats in the universe. Let's take a look at what the noble idea of creating the United Nations has turned into. Not on a fictional planet, but on a real one. Perhaps the main hope for the New World Council, formed in the midst of World War II, was to put an end to at least major military conflicts. The previous organization, the League of Nations, failed spectacularly and did not prevent Hitler from withdrawing Germany from the League and starting preparations to seize Europe. It seemed logical that after 2 world wars, the leaders of countries should be wiser and find ways to reach agreements without resorting to military force. In reality, the main reason for all the contradictions was already present in the UN right after its creation. This was the veto power. It can be used by the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: the USSR, now the Russian Federation, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and China. There are 6 main bodies in the UN, but we will talk about them later, since it is the Security Council that has the greatest influence over world events. It can be used without limit, and no resolution put forward in the Council can be adopted if any of the members has used the veto. The Council has the greatest influence over world events. This led to a double-edged situation. Even if a resolution to deploy peacekeeping forces was supported by everyone, it did not necessarily mean that these troops could actually change anything in the conflict region. On the other hand, if someone used the veto, in most cases they did whatever they wanted. The only thing is that the news would report that it was done without UN authorization. If we talk about the numbers, this is how the use of the veto is distributed among the countries. In total, it has already been used 284 times. Quite often, this concerned the admission of new members to the UN. The Cold War had a strong impact. More than 30 times the USSR rejected the admission of new countries to the UN that would have tipped the balance of power in favor of the US. And the US, in turn, used its veto 51 times in favor of Israel. We could discuss the topic of the veto for hours, but it's more interesting to focus on major UN peacekeeping operations. Everything worked out perfectly. The countries unanimously agreed to take joint measures. What happens in that case? Simply put, the Blue Organization's operations involving military force are always an attempt to intervene when things have already gotten bad. Bureaucratic red tape and a century of waiting. Everyone will accept it.
Резолюцию, разные правки и договоренности между странами, а где-то в Африке уже случился геноцид. Или
we end up with operations in Yugoslavia that, to put it mildly, failed. There's a joke going around the Balkans. If you ever feel useless, just remember that UN peacekeepers were in Bosnia. We have a full video about the Yugoslav wars that explains everything in detail. Or the division of Cyprus, where the American fleet acted as the third force, brought to the island's shores. Peacekeepers have been guarding the borders of Cyprus since then, but it's hard to say they've had any real impact on the conflict. In fact, in any territories except Africa, peacekeepers have made virtually no contribution to stopping wars, from the Korean War to the war pitting the United States and Israel against Iran. And there are a lot of questions about Africa as well. For example, the civil war in Rwanda ended with mass genocide. At the moment when the massacre began and the peacekeepers' headquarters requested reinforcements, An order came from the main office to withdraw most of the troops. Only 270 people remained at the base. They simply watched as up to 800,000 Tutsi were killed. We also have a video about this. In general, most operations are considered politically motivated, and this is not surprising because of the very structure of the UN. A good example is the Congolese operation.
Кризис. Формально задача миротворцев заключалась в том, чтобы стабилизировать страну после получения независимости от Бельгии и не допустить распада. Внутри самого Конго шла борьба за власть, а внешние игроки, прежде всего Соединенные Штаты и Советский Союз, воспринимали происходящее через призму холодной войны. Самый спорный эпизод связан с фигурой Патрис Лумумба. Он считался более склонным к сотрудничеству с Союзом, поэтому западные страны
Lumumba was seen as a threat to their political interests. At the same time, the UN officially maintained a neutral position. But in practice, the peacekeepers did not support Lumumba at a critical moment, when he was overthrown and later killed. And we don't want to say here that someone is good and someone is bad. The example with Lumumba is telling. Major players in the UN use the situation to their advantage, while the people of Congo get nothing. A similar situation happened in Libya. The Security Council mandate was about protecting civilians, but in the end, the operation led to bombings and the killing of Muammar Gaddafi, who we also have a video about. Supporters believe that this was necessary to prevent mass casualties. Critics say that the mandate was stretched and used to achieve a political goal. Overall, trust in such operations has significantly decreased. To illustrate from another perspective, one can mention the Hungarian uprising and the Prague Spring. The United Nations was effectively paralyzed and could not influence the actions of the Soviet Union. There were also crises related to decolonization. For example, the situation in southern Rhodesia and, in general, the policy against apartheid in the Republic of South Africa. Here, the Soviet Union consistently supported sanctions against regimes associated with the Western Bloc. At the moment, this is what the map of deployed peacekeeping forces around the world looks like. Here they are stationed in Kosovo. Here is the border between India and Pakistan. And here is the already mentioned Cyprus. Here, there are as many as 3 locations related to Israel and its neighbors, and 5 locations in Africa. In the Congo itself, in the Central African Republic, which is torn apart by civil wars. Here is the Abyei territory between Sudan and South Sudan. Again, it's a disputed border. In South Sudan, just to be safe, there's another mission, and there's one point in Western Sahara due to the conflict with Morocco. Overall, that's all you need to understand about peacekeeping missions. As long as major players in the UN influence the decisions made, there can be no talk of neutrality. All right, achieving world peace didn't work out, but the UN has other areas of focus as well. Here you have election monitoring, providing food aid to developing countries, environmental initiatives, and the protection of human rights. And here we remember that the UN has other bodies besides the Security Council. For example, the International Court of Justice, the one in The Hague. You can say the same thing about it as about peacekeeping missions. Major scandals here happen precisely because of political decisions. Many were outraged by the Yugoslav tribunal. 58% of all those convicted were Serbs. Serbia, of course, is the largest country among all the former republics. But there's another, more important factor. Who exactly was convicted? From Serbia, they literally hauled off the biggest names. General Radko Mladic was convicted, accused of crimes during the World War in Serbia, and of course, the president of Yugoslavia, Slobodan Milosevic. It would seem like a fair outcome. But among the politicians and military leaders of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the field commanders of the Kosovo Liberation Army who were involved in war crimes against the Serbian population, none of the major figures were convicted. In addition, the Croatian general who commanded Operation Storm against the Serbs was convicted in 2011 but acquitted a year later. It was precisely after the Yugoslav tribunal that the International Court of Justice began to be seen as a biased body. Nevertheless, the International Court of Justice still resolves certain issues, such as territorial ones. They settled a complicated border dispute between Botswana and Namibia. The bone of contention was an island on the Chobe River. The court ruled that the island belongs to Botswana, and Namibia complied with this decision. The case of Nicaragua versus the United States became widely known. After the government there was overthrown, the court recorded a violation by America, and, as stated in the protocol, taking the court's position into account, the United States later refused to recognize its compulsory jurisdiction. A border dispute between Bahrain and Qatar was also resolved, as well as one between Ukraine and Romania over the continental shelf in the Black Sea. Then there was the case between Russia and Georgia, which concerned racial discrimination, but it ended with nothing. The court simply closed the case. The same applies to Ukraine's next lawsuit. The case is stalled, and there is no decision. But the UN resolved the much more complicated dispute over the Preah Vihear Temple, a place of pilgrimage and worship for the Khmer people, which was under Thailand's control. The court ruled that the temple is actually located on Cambodian territory. Therefore, Thailand must withdraw its police and armed forces and return all items taken from the ruins. The main thing here is not to get confused. There is also the International Criminal Court, which also sits in The Hague, but has a different jurisdiction. The International Criminal Court is not part of the official United Nations structures, although it can initiate cases upon the request of the UN Security Council. A number of countries fundamentally oppose the very idea of the International Criminal Court because it limits the sovereignty of states and has too much authority. Among them are the United States, India, Israel, Iran, and China. And overall, if you look at the map, not that many countries are marked in green. These countries have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, the foundation of the International Criminal Court. But it was the ICC, not the UN court, that issued the high-profile arrest warrants in recent years, for example, for Netanyahu or Putin. There was also a body called the Trusteeship Council, which was closed in 1994. After World War II, there were many territories that were not fully fledged states, former colonies, mandated territories, and lands taken from defeated countries. And the task of the Trusteeship Council was formulated as follows: to oversee the administration of the territories and prepare them for independence. From the wording, you might think it refers, for example, to the territories of defeated Germany. But no, it was actually about the territories of Africa and Oceania. Nevertheless, on paper, this body is considered the most successful because it fulfilled its modest functions and was dissolved. The next major body is the General Assembly, probably the most useful thing in the UN since all member countries are represented here. There is no veto power, and each country has only one vote, regardless of its size. Here, current issues are discussed and resolutions are adopted. Essentially, this is world public opinion in an official form. Although there isn't much use to it, at least the Assembly hasn't been involved in major scandals. However, there is a downside here as well. Countries that have come under the economic or political influence of major powers can once again vote on resolutions, favoring one side or another. The United Nations Economic and Social Council is another major body, but it does not deal with wars and security. Here they oversee the economy, healthcare, education, and the fight against poverty. The Council itself doesn't give orders, but rather coordinates the work of different UN organizations and helps countries act together. And here comes the Grey Eminence, who is also the main executive body of the UN, the Secretariat. This is the last major body, and this is where the practical implementation of everything agreed upon by politicians in the Security Council or the Assembly takes place. For example, this is where people are selected for peacekeeping missions and humanitarian aid is allocated to third world countries. The Secretariat has accumulated a lot. One of the major scandals happened in 2005 when hundreds of cases of sexual assault by peacekeeping forces were exposed, mostly during operations in Africa. The permanent representative of Jordan prepared the report. Some young girls I spoke with in the Democratic Republic of the Congo talked about rape disguised as prostitution. According to them, they were raped and then given money or food to make the rape look like consensual sex. He also noted that sexual exploitation results in children fathered by peacekeepers. A total of 72 allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse have been received. One can only guess how many such allegations were never reported. An even more foolish failure happened in Haiti. After the massive earthquake, UN workers were sent there. Shortly after their arrival, a cholera outbreak began in the country, something Haiti hadn't faced in decades. During the investigation, the following chain of events was discovered. The peacekeeping contingent was stationed in unsanitary conditions, after which waste from the camp entered the local water system. Because of this, the cholera bacteria got into the river where residents collected water. In other words, the peacekeepers' toilet waste contaminated Haiti's main water supply. As a result of the epidemic, between 10,000 and 30,000 Haitians died, and at first the Secretariat denied everything, then after a major media scandal partially admitted it, and then still did not properly punish those responsible. The biggest corruption scandal happened in 1995. Iraq was under international sanctions after the Gulf War, and then the UN launched the Oil for Food program, which allowed the country to sell oil in limited quantities, and the money received was used to buy food and medicine. All of this was under the control of the Blue Helmets. What could possibly go wrong? This whole complicated scheme with oil sales and lots of money in circulation turned into a huge money laundering network. Investigations revealed large-scale kickbacks and the use of the program for the benefit of certain intermediaries and officials. This is the most high-profile case, although similar practices were widespread in Africa as well, since it's very difficult to keep track of the flow of money there. What can I say? Even the main UN office in New York is associated with corruption. They uncovered inflated contracts for building repairs, fake consulting services, and favored contractors there. It's no surprise. A structure literally made up of officials from all over the world simply can't do without corruption. Here it is, the global union we deserve. There's also a media department in the Secretariat, where they create various videos, hold discussions, and launch initiatives. Finally, after the sad topics, you can enjoy yourself with the most interesting part. So how did the world government decide to bring its noble ideas of equality and well-being to us ordinary mortals? Well, for example, on their official YouTube account, they decided to tackle the problem of violence with high-quality animation. Here, as they say, it's better to show once than to tell 100 times.
Son, why do you want to join the army?
To kick some ass.
Sir?
Son, why do you want to join the army?
To kill, to rob, and of course to fuck, sir.
And you, son, why do you want to join the army?
To keep the peace, to protect all women and children, sir.
Sir?
Arrest these criminals, soldier. The uniform doesn't give you the right to fuck.
To avoid getting into another scandal, this time a racist one, the UN animators colored the soldiers' skin blue. It seems like no one was offended, but the color suspiciously resembles the peacekeepers' helmets. And considering the scandal involving sexual violence by the UN contingent in Africa, maybe it was the right choice to color them that way. However, this is just one of a whole series of videos with high-quality animation called No Excuses. For example, in this video, the father of 2 children, after his favorite soccer club gets a red card, of course, wants to whip his child with a belt. Here, a comedian talks about violence, after which the phrase is heard,
You don't have to hit to cause pain. Stop the verbal abuse.
In the end, after all these videos, the same groups of people are blamed for the violence. Nothing new. It was also decided to finally and irrevocably solve the problem of child marriages. To do this, a graphic was released with the proud title, A Child Should Never Get Married. Internet users immediately noticed that the image showed a white girl with light hair. And if you open the link under their own image, you can suddenly discover that child marriages are not common in Europe or the States at all. Since the UN actively supports women, a commission on their rights was created. In 2021, Iran was added to the commission, where women have incredibly advanced rights, like the mandatory wearing of the hijab. In 2024, a man from Saudi Arabia was appointed as the chairman of the commission, where the female half of the population enjoys such advantages as a ban on moving around the city alone, limited higher education, gender segregation in public places, and other privileges. Then it was necessary to address the problem of journalists being killed. So the UN Women Australia account highlighted a frightening issue. Out of all,
Журналистов, убитых в 2021 году,
11% were women. In 2020, this figure was 6%. Stop targeting women journalists. In the comments, people were naturally surprised. What gender were the remaining 89% of killed journalists? And how does the UN hire people in the media sector? To draw attention to global issues, the UN sometimes invites popular personalities. Jolie, Emma Watson, and of course, Greta Thunberg. Does this help solve global problems? No one knows. But Emma Watson became the face of a new he-for-she campaign. We're talking about men who fully support the feminist movement. They're called allies. To put it in simple terms, it's a man who promotes the ideas of transnational corporations and the most progressive agenda for free. Men were encouraged to help through social media posts and by reading a booklet with 5 steps to overcome violence. 1. Limit aggressive feelings. 2. Calm your emotions. 3. Ask yourself, why do I choose violence? 4. Recognize your emotions and accept them so they can pass. 5. Choose to act constructively. In the end, the UN's brilliant he-for-she campaign was pelted with rotten tomatoes from both the left and the right. Second-wave feminists were outraged that women still had no say. Third-wave feminists were upset that the title didn't include so-called pronouns, meaning other genders. And conservatives raised the question of when attention would be paid to violence against men. After that, the UN invited feminist Anita Sarkeesian, who raised an incredibly important issue at the organization.
насилие в видеоиграх.
I choose violence. Yes, in an international organization with straight faces, the idea was promoted that actions in a game are equivalent to actions in real life. There's really no point in saying anything about Greta Thunberg's speeches on climate, since even in progressive Western Europe, people make fun of her. We can also mention Klaus Schwab because he is connected with the World Health Organization, which is also a UN structure. Schwab started the global trend about eating bugs. We also have a video about this on our channel. Originally, it was a conspiracy theory, but eventually it not only became reality, it is now actively promoted by Hollywood stars. The UN's climate efforts irritate a huge number of people around the world. In the West, a meme about the private jets of the famous singer Taylor Swift went viral. After all, while the world government asks us to pollute the air less, in just 6 months of flights, her private jets emitted 8,230 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, you keep saving on fuel for your car. So, what conclusion can we draw about the UN's activities? We'll find out about this from experts who leave detailed comments under the video. And if you're not an expert, rate this episode fairly, share it if you liked it, and see you in upcoming videos on our channel.